Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Baldur's Gate 3 Level 3 Spell Report Cards. Today we are going to cover Vampiric Touch and Daylight, a couple spells that I have loosely categorized together as being vampire adjacent somehow. After the video, you can vote on what tier you think these spells should be in the polls in the description. Let's start with Vampiric Touch. Vampiric Touch. Touch an enemy to siphon their life force and regain half as many hit points. For 10 turns, you can use Vampiric Touch again without expending an additional spell slot. This costs your action, your spell slot, and your concentration to cast, and it deals 3d6 necrotic damage. It has a melee range, and it is an attack roll. For upcasting, you deal an additional 1d6 damage. This spell is learned by warlocks, wizards, land druids, death domain clerics, and via magical secrets. So, Vampiric Touch is a damage spell that deals 3d6 necrotic damage. This is a range of 3 to 18 and is 10.5 on average. This number is very low. I will give you a numerical comparison soon, but 10.5 just doesn't stand up to other damaging options, especially as a concentration melee single target spell. It's also necrotic damage, which is a weak damage type. It's not the worst in the game, but it's probably the second worst. Many enemies, especially in Act 2, are resistant or immune to necrotic damage. Like I mentioned, the spell is also melee range, which makes it tough to use and really gates it from most spellcasters because you don't want them to be within melee range of enemies. A notable plus, as a melee spell and a necrotic damage spell, the Death Domain Cleric can use their Channel Divinity with this spell and ignore resistance, so if you are looking to make a Vampiric Touch build, Death Domain Cleric might be your choice of class, but this doesn't mean that if you're playing a Death Domain Cleric, you should use the spell. You really shouldn't, especially when Inflict Wounds is right there, dealing more damage at level 1. Now, I'm going to cut over to a comparison with other damaging spells to show you actually how low this damage is. Alright, we've got a table here of every damaging spell, levels 1 through 3, and I have sorted it by average level 3 damage. This is a very simple view that only uses average damage to compare the spells, and there's obviously much more to look at with spells, but this is an okay baseline for how much damage one does. Alright, at the top we have Moonbeam and Cloud of Daggers. These damage numbers assume 2 procs of damage, and this is because it will happen on placement and at the start of an enemy's turn, so it is very, very likely. Next we have a trio of level 3 spells, as well as Scorching Ray, and we would want to compare Vampiric Touch directly to some of the other options that these casters would have at level 3. So Lightning Bolt and Fireball here have 28 average damage. Notably, Inflict Wounds here, a level 1 spell, upcast to 3rd level, is just behind at 27.5 average damage, and this is also a melee necrotic damage necromancy spell. Let's scroll down a bit, past a bit of the upcasted level 1 spells. Here we have Magic Missile at 17.5 average damage, and this spell cannot miss. And if we go down a bit more, just a bit more, and here we are. Vampiric Touch right at the bottom of the list. This is tied for the 30th highest average damage. There are only a handful of spells below. This should really show you how weak this spell is. We are on par with an upcasted Ensnaring Strike to 3rd level, 1 hit from a upcasted Flame Blade. This is just 1 attack, and this spell gets no bonus for upcasting to level 3. We're on par with Branding Smite, and we are on par with 1 attack from a Flaming Sphere. Notably, this is also below where Firebolt would be, the cantrip, if it was included. Although the damage is terrible, the spell does also have a heal associated with it. This heal is also terrible because it's based on the low damage. But it is there, I guess. It does mean that you can self-apply on heal effects, which is nice. A healing potion will likely heal you more and do the same thing for a bonus action, but you can use this on a cleric, say, who has the Whispering Promise to apply it to themselves. Last thing of note, if you do want to use this spell, you need to be aware of multiclassing. As a granted spell, any recast of the spell will use the spellcasting modifier of the most recent class you multiclassed into. If you're unaware of this mechanic, I'll link a video in the description that you can check out to learn more. Grades on this one are going to be very, very low. Weak damage spells can't get by on niche scenarios or specific uses because often they're just too numerically outclassed. But this spell isn't only numerically outclassed, and it is by a long shot. It is also weak in every other aspect too. It is a melee spell, it's concentration, and it's necrotic damage. So I have literally all Fs. I think this spell really lacks any redeeming qualities. I love the idea of a damage spell that drains health, but it's just way too weak overall to really justify using. It's going to be getting an F overall. Next up is Daylight. Daylight. Enchant an item to shine like the sun or summon a sphere of sunlight that dispels all darkness around it. Items can only be enchanted with Daylight for 20 turns, which is not true actually. This costs your action to cast, and you can cast it within a range of 60 feet. The Daylight itself has a radius of 50 feet. This is learned by clerics, druids, sorcerers, light domain clerics, land druids, rangers, paladins, and via magical secrets. So, Daylight the spell simply creates light in a 50-foot radius. The light can originate from a point you choose, or an item that is enchanted. This will last until long rest, even if you cast it on a weapon, so the description does lie to you a bit. This seems pretty bad on first glance. Light and dancing lights are cantrip options that can do the same thing in a smaller radius, and light sources as a whole are also very common around the world. The difference is that Daylight has a few special effects connected to it being thematically sunlight instead of some other type of light. Notably, this will trigger sunlight sensitivity, which gives creatures disadvantage on attack rolls. These creatures are somewhat common in the game. Dwergar, Drow, and Shadows are the most common. Karnus the Drider and Kobolds also have sunlight sensitivity. Disadvantage on all attacks with no save is a pretty good debuff. It also dispels darkness clouds. This is useful against Sharans, who use the spell and sometimes emit darkness when they're killed. Lastly, vampires will take 20 radiant damage per turn whenever they start their turn in Daylight, as well as the normal disadvantage on attack rolls. All of these effects on their own are nice, but it's probably not worth casting the spell for one fight, except against the vampires, in which case it can be justified. So I wouldn't recommend using Daylight Sphere. The effects are nice, but really nothing special. However, I would recommend casting Daylight on a weapon for Act 2. In Act 2, you will run into many shadows, you're going to run into many heavily obscured places, the Shadow Curse, some Drow and Dwergar, and some of the Sharans who summon darkness clouds on death. In any one encounter, this spell is probably not worth it, but casting it on a weapon for many encounters throughout the entire day in Act 2 is very worth it. Treating this spell like a day-long buff for Act 2 is the right way to think about it, and it is a good option. Casting the Daylight Sphere option does not work in some cases in Act 2, so be extra sure you're using it on a weapon. Onto the grades, I have an F for early game. Pre-Act 2, there just aren't many enemies who this is good against, and your level 3 spell slot will be more contested. Mid-game gets an A. This is just generally a good option in Act 2. No save disadvantage on attack rolls against dozens of enemies is a good effect. Late game gets a D. In Act 3, this is really more of an encounter-specific option for 1.5 fights, I would say, so it's not a generally good spell. Middle grades are a little wonky because this is a hyper-specific spell. It is good in set encounters and useless in others. I have given specificity and price A's because it is very good in those cases and functions like a day-long buff with no concentration cost. On the other hand, I have an F for versatility. I split the difference for the more general rating of a C and superiority. For class or item synergies, I have listed the Callous Glow Ring because technically that item needs light to work, but really this doesn't have interactions like that. Overall, I have put all of this together for a C tier. I think this is a good but not essential choice for Act 2, and fairly weak for the rest of the game. If it was ever a must-cast spell, I might rate it higher overall, but I think C is fair for a spell that is strong, but not OP for a specific portion of the game. Onto the tier list, I have Daylight actually at the top of C tier so far. I think it's more practically usable than Warden of Vitality, and even if you're not casting it on a weapon, it's probably still useful as a one-time use in the Cazador fight. Vampiric Touch is in F tier. I have it above a couple spells because it does technically do something. The damage it does is very low and inefficient, but I think that's more than Beacon of Hope's level of useless. Alright, that's all I've got for today. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a good one.